In this video, I'm going to discuss whether or not consulting services are subject to peer review. So I've done peer reviews for about 15 years. And what I've seen as I've done those, peer reviewers are looking at audits, reviews, agreed upon procedures, examinations, compilations, and sometimes preparations under ARC 70. But peer reviewers do not look at consulting services. So this morning I got a call from a friend. He's a sole proprietor CPA. He's the only owner, obviously, but he has 3 or 4 employees, and he knows that the new quality management standards are coming up December the 15th of this year. And he was asking me, is there a way that I can do financial statements and not be subject to the new QM standards? And the answer to that question is yes, if you perform or create those financial statements as a consulting engagement. So he had been using the preparation standard previously, but we talked about SARS 27, which recently came out from the AICPA. And SARS 27 says if you as a CPA create financial statements and it's not the primary objective of the engagement, then that service can be a consulting engagement, which is not subject to peer review. And it also doesn't trigger a need for the new quality management standards. Now, I'm not trying to tell you don't pursue the quality management standards. I like those standards. But if you're a small practitioner and there's just 1 or 2 people and you're issuing financial statements every month, you're doing bookkeeping, and you're meeting with that client often, you're consulting with the client, you're helping the client grow their business, think about strategy and those kind of things, then under SARS 27, that could be a consulting engagement and it's not subject to the SARS. So under the new QM standards, if you have an accounting and auditing practice, then you've got to follow those new standards. So what is an A&A practice? It's basically any practice that's performing audits or engagement subject to the SARS or the attestation standards. Consulting engagements are not any of those. So what is a consulting engagement? Well, it's anything that's not an A&A engagement. So when you do advisory services, say tax services, that's a consulting engagement. And the AICPA has specific consulting standards. Now, I've got those open over here on my screen. They're only 7 pages long. They were created in 1992. They were amended in 2015. So these standards are very simple. Again, only 7 pages, and that includes a table of contents. So there's not a lot there to learn. So what's in the consulting standards? Well, they're simply saying that you should more or less do a good job. It talks about professional competence, talks about due professional care, talks about planning and supervision, talks about understanding your client, talks about communicating with your client. So these are basic things that we would do in any service or should be doing in any service with a client. But following the consulting standards issued by the AICPA is something different than following the accounting and review and compilation standards. So the consulting services standards are separate from the audit standards, separate from the SARS standards, separate from the attestation standards. So if you're looking for a way to make sure that the work you're doing is not going to be reviewed in peer review, you want it to be a consulting service. Now, sometimes I get the question, when should I do an agreed upon procedures engagement for a client? They want me to look at, say, inventory. Well, the answer to that question, and by the way, an AUP is a part of the attestation standards. If you do an engagement like that, it's subject to peer review. But if you do an AUP and you issue an agreed upon procedures report, it is an attest service, and your client can take that AUP report, provide it to a bank, provide it to a third party, and you're giving comfort to that third party, say like a bank. But if you perform that same service for just the client, and that report's not going to anybody else, maybe the client just needs some assistance in reviewing their inventory processes or their inventory counts. You could do that as a consulting engagement. Now, the consulting standards don't require an engagement letter, but I would get one anyway. I would write an engagement letter that addresses what you're going to do and what you're not going to do in that engagement. But generally, you'll use a consulting standards when it's just you and the client. If you get other third parties that are going to place reliance on your work, then most of the time you want to move more toward either audit or SARS or attestation standards, because those are really designed to allow you to give comfort to third parties. The consulting services standards are not designed to give comfort to a third party. So I go back to where I started. Oh, are there services that you as a CPA can provide that are not subject to peer review and that don't trigger the need for compliance with the new quality management standards? The answer is yes, but you'll want to perform all of your services for clients as a consulting engagements. If you do one or two compilations, for example, well, you're in the soup and you'll need a peer review. But if all of your engagements that you perform for all of your clients are consulting, then you would not be subject to peer review. You would not be subject to the new quality management standards. I hope that helps. Until we meet again, take care and bye now.